The wind off Lake Michigan shrieked like a warning. It didn't whisper. It screamed, rattling the glass doors of Mercy General Hospital in angry bursts that even the thick insulation couldn't keep out. Inside the ER, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on everything they touched. Nurses in rumpled scrubs bustled past, their faces drawn tight with fatigue. Nora Whitmore leaned against the break room counter, her fingers wrapped tightly around a lukewarm cup of coffee that had long since stopped pretending to be fresh. Her shift had ended 30 minutes ago, but she hadn't moved. The storm outside had started just after sunset and hadn't let up for a moment. Snow blanketed the city in a relentless assault, thick, blinding, and indiscriminate. Public transportation had halted by 10 p.m., and rideshare prices had surged into the triple digits. Still, she couldn't stay. She needed to get home. Not for anyone waiting, but because staying meant more memories pressing in on her like fogged glass. And she was already holding back too much. Pulling on her coat, a faded grey thing that had lost its warmth 2 winters ago, she pushed out into the lobby, nodded at the security guard, and exited through the side door. The wind caught her immediately, biting at her cheeks like shards of glass. The alley behind the hospital was dimly lit, its only illumination a single orange street lamp struggling against the snowfall. She kept her head down, moving quickly. The world felt strangely quiet beneath the blanket of snow. The noise of the city dulled to a hush. That's when she saw it, what looked like a bundle of cloth slumped near a dumpster, half covered in snow. She might have passed it by, chalked it up to discarded laundry or a collapsed tent if not for the hand. Pale fingers protruded from the snow, unmoving. She stopped. Every instinct in her body screamed that this was trouble, that she should go back, inside and call someone else. But instinct was what had brought her into medicine in the first place. It wasn't in her nature to walk away. Kneeling carefully, she brushed snow from the figure. It was a man, large, unconscious, his face smeared with blood and bruises, one eye swollen shut. He wore a wool coat that had once been expensive, though now it was torn and stained. His breath came in ragged bursts. There was still life in him, but not much. "Sir," she said, tapping his shoulder gently. "Can you hear me?" His eyes flickered open for the briefest second, revealing a startling blue, then closed again. She checked his pulse. Weak, irregular. The wind roared harder. She couldn't leave him here. With effort that strained her muscles, she managed to haul him to his feet. He groaned but didn't resist. She slung his arm over her shoulder, gripping his waist tightly, and half dragged him the 2 blocks to her building, praying all the way that no one would stop her. In this neighborhood, people didn't ask questions. Still, the stares from the few residents braving the storm cut into her like knives. Inside her apartment, small second-floor walk-up cluttered with worn furniture and medical books, she eased him down onto the couch. He sagged into it, eyes closed again, lips faintly parted. She flicked on a lamp, its yellow light revealing more bruises, cuts on his knuckles, a torn shirt beneath the coat, blood matted to his temple. She got to work. From a drawer in the kitchen, she pulled out gauze, antiseptic, gloves. Years in the ER had taught her to work quickly and quietly. She cleaned his wounds, bandaged his head, wrapped his ribs. He didn't stir, but his breathing evened out and color slowly returned to his face. When she was finished, she stood back and studied him. He was too clean-cut to be homeless. Even injured and unconscious, he radiated something. Elegance? Authority? She couldn't name it, but it hovered around him like a shadow. Nora fetched a blanket from the linen closet and draped it over him, then set a glass of water on the coffee table. The storm outside still raged, now accompanied by the occasional burst of thunder. She sank into the armchair across from him and wrapped her arms around herself. It wasn't the first time she'd brought someone home in a moment of impulse, but it was the first time she hadn't questioned it. Something about him, the blood, the silence, the cold, had hit her deeper than logic could reach. She watched him breathe until sleep finally claimed her. When Nora awoke, it was still dark. Her neck ached from where she'd slumped in the chair, and the room was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock and the hum of the heater. The man was still unconscious, though he'd shifted slightly. The blanket had slipped from his shoulder. She stood stretching and reached for the fabric to pull it back up. That's when she saw the corner of something metallic sticking out of the inside coat pocket. A watch. It gleamed in the dim light. Sleek, understated, obviously expensive. She hesitated, then pulled it out to examine it. The back was engraved with 2 simple letters, W.A., her brow furrowed. Not many people could afford a custom piece like that, let alone leave it carelessly tucked into a pocket while bleeding in an alley. She glanced at the man again. His face, though battered, was undeniably handsome. High cheekbones, a strong jawline, lips that seemed carved in stillness. "Who the hell are you?" She put the watch aside, telling herself she'd ask him when he woke up. The next morning, she called into the hospital and told them she was sick. Not a lie exactly, just not the kind of sickness they were thinking. She needed time to figure out what to do. He woke mid-afternoon, disoriented, his voice barely a whisper. "Water," he rasped. She helped him sit up and handed him the glass. He drank slowly, hands shaking. "Where am I?" "My apartment," she said gently. "Chicago. I found you behind the hospital last night. You were unconscious, bleeding. I couldn't leave you out there." He looked around slowly, absorbing the surroundings. "You're a doctor?" "Nurse," she corrected. "Emergency room, Mercy General." He gave a faint nod. "You saved me." "You needed saving," she replied. He tried to sit straighter but winced, pressing a hand to his side. She moved to stop him. "You've got at least one cracked rib," she said. "You were beat up. Bad." Silence stretched between them. Then carefully she asked, "What's your name?" He looked at her, and for a moment she saw hesitation flicker in his eyes. "Liam," he said finally. "Liam what?" A pause. "Just Liam." She didn't believe him, but something in his expression warned her not to push. "Okay, Liam," she said, folding her arms. "Well, you're here until that storm lets up and you can stand without blacking out. That gives you about 48 hours. I won't be any trouble," he said quickly. She smiled just a little. "Good, because I already have enough of that." The day passed quietly. He slept for most of it. She watched from the kitchen table, flipping through a book she wasn't really reading. Every now and then he stirred, mumbled something in his sleep. Once she heard a name. Charlotte. Another time he whispered something that sounded like "no deal." That night, when she finally turned off the lights and lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling for a long time. Her fingers toyed with the corner of the blanket as her mind raced. "We-A." The initials lingered in her thoughts. She couldn't shake the feeling she had brought someone into her home who carried far more danger than the cold and the bruises suggested. But the strangest part wasn't fear. It was the quiet ache that had settled in her chest. Like for the first time in months, she wasn't completely alone, even if she had no idea who this man truly was. The snowstorm had not let up. Chicago remained. Paralyzed beneath layers of white, the streets eerily still, muffled by nature's silence. The city's usual symphony of horns, chatter, and transit noise had vanished, replaced by the occasional crack of wind against window panes and the soft crunch of ice shifting on rooftops. Inside the small apartment on West Walton Street, time seemed suspended. Nora stood in the doorway of her kitchen, a mug of tea cupped in her hands, watching the man on her couch stir beneath the blanket she draped over him. The bruising along his cheekbone had darkened overnight, and his chest rose and fell in uneven intervals. His presence in her living room still felt surreal. A stranger, injured, unnamed, or at least not truly named. Liam, he had said, but it was clear to her that Liam wasn't the truth. It was a placeholder, a wall he had erected between himself and the world. And yet, he had trusted her enough to stay. He hadn't tried to run when he woke that morning. Instead, he had accepted her care, his silence more telling than any confession. It had been years since Nora had felt this odd flutter of something between concern and curiosity. Since Jonathan had left, taking more than just his suitcase, she'd stopped letting people get close. Her ex-fiancé hadn't simply ended their engagement, he had decimated her foundation. His betrayal with her sister had left a wound she hadn't wanted to acknowledge. It had been easier to bury herself in night shifts, in trauma codes, in tending to the bleeding wounds of strangers than confronting her own. But now this man, this Liam, who bled on her rug and stared at her, like he saw something he hadn't expected, was peeling back those protective layers she'd wrapped around herself so tightly. She walked into the living room and set the mug on the coffee table. "You should eat something." Liam shifted, blinking his eyes open. The bruising made him look rough, but those eyes, clear ice blue, still held something sharp behind this pain. "I'm not hungry," he murmured. "You haven't had anything in over a day," she said gently, crouching beside the couch. "Trust me. I work with unconscious men all the time. They wake up starving." He gave a small, reluctant smile. That's supposed to make me feel special? She tilted her head. No, just compliant. His laugh was hoarse, brief, but it softened, something in the air between them. She stood and walked back into the kitchen, returning moments later with toast, scrambled eggs, and a small bowl of soup. Nothing fancy, but warm, familiar, safe. He sat up with effort, grunting under his breath, as pain laced through his side. You cracked a rib, she reminded him, placing the tray on his lap. Small movements. Breathe shallow. I reinforced the wrap. He took a spoonful of soup and paused, surprised by its warmth. Thank you, he said again, more earnestly this time. She nodded, settling into the armchair across from him. You want to tell me what happened to you? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he finished a bite of egg, chewed slowly, then wiped his mouth with the edge of the napkin she'd provided. I got caught in the wrong place, he said finally. Said the wrong thing. To the wrong people. Who? He looked at her, eyes cool but not hostile. People I thought I could trust. There was something about the way he said it, measured, restrained, that made her pulse quicken, not with fear, with recognition. That was a kind of pain she understood intimately. She leaned forward. I get it, you know. He raised an eyebrow. I've been betrayed too. He didn't ask, didn't prod, just nodded like he knew exactly what it felt like to have the world pull out from beneath your feet. The rest of the day passed quietly. Snow still pressed against the windows, thick and unrelenting. Liam slept again in short intervals, his body clearly not yet ready to resume the world's pace. Nora stayed nearby, not hovering, but present, always within reach. She read from an old paperback, half distracted, watching him more than the pages. That evening, the lights flickered once, then died completely. The storm had claimed the block. She groaned, lighting the emergency candles she kept under the sink. Their soft glow gave the room an amber hue, casting long shadows on the walls. She filled a kettle with water and placed it on her gas stove, thankful that at least one thing in her apartment didn't rely on electricity. Liam stirred again. You okay? She asked. I thought I was dreaming, he said, his voice groggy. The light, it looks like firelight, she smiled, sitting down beside the coffee table. Just candles. Power's out. Welcome to post-apocalyptic living. He shifted, adjusting his position. I've lived worse. Yeah? She asked, curious now. What's worse than a blizzard in a stranger's apartment with cracked ribs? He didn't speak for a long time. Then, loneliness. Her breath caught. He looked over at her, the candlelight reflecting off his cheekbones. You ever feel like everyone in your life just wants something from you? And when you don't give it, they turn cold? She swallowed. Yes, I've lived that too. It was the most honest exchange she'd had with anyone in months. Later that night, they sat on the floor, sharing the last of her shortbread cookies and talking in low voices. He told her about Paris, about a place he'd once stood on the Pont Alexandre III and thought the world was still beautiful. She told him about the night her father left and how silence became her mother's cruelest weapon. Their pain became a bridge. But the moment that shifted, everything was small, almost unremarkable. She reached to pass him a napkin and their fingers brushed. It was a simple touch. Barely a second, but he flinched, not from pain but from something deeper. A reflex. Like touch itself was foreign. She pulled back. Sorry. He shook his head slowly. No, it's not you. And she saw it then, the fragility beneath his guarded surface. Whoever Liam was, he hadn't just been hurt. He had been fractured. That night, after he'd fallen asleep again, Nora sat by the window wrapped in a blanket and watched the snow fall like feathers from the sky. She couldn't explain why she felt tethered to him. He was still a stranger. A man with secrets. A man she didn't fully trust. But there was something else too. A quiet understanding. A stillness that mirrored her own. In the corner of the room, Liam stirred again, murmuring in his sleep. But it wasn't her name, he said. It was someone else's. Charlotte. Nora's eyes narrowed. The pieces in her mind were shifting again, and for the first time she realized that she wasn't just helping a broken man. She might be living with someone running from a past bigger than either of them. She just didn't know how big it was yet. The next morning arrived dressed in blue-gray shadows. The sun had begun to climb behind thick clouds, offering little warmth, and the city remained suspended under its icy white shroud. Inside the apartment, the power had returned sometime before dawn, but the faint buzz of electricity felt intrusive. Now, the quiet of candlelight and late-night confessions had left behind an echo of intimacy that the sudden hum of the refrigerator seemed to violate. Nora stood in the bathroom, bracing her hands on the edge of the sink, her reflection fogged. With steam from the shower she hadn't taken yet, she had barely slept. The name he'd spoken, Charlotte, still clung to her thoughts. It wasn't just a name. It had weight, history, and heartbreak in the way he had whispered it. A single syllable, but it carried too much pain to be meaningless. She dried her hands, tied her hair back, and returned to the kitchen to start coffee. The scent filled the small space. Something grounding, something normal. It steadied her. She turned toward the living room and found him already awake. Liam sat on the couch upright this time, the blanket still draped across his lap. He looked pale but alert. His eyes, those striking blue eyes, followed her as she moved, cautious and quiet. "You slept," she said, handing him a mug. "I dreamed," he replied, accepting the coffee with both hands. She nodded but didn't press. If he wanted to explain the name he'd murmured, he would. They drank in silence. Outside, the snow had slowed to a gentle drift, and the outlines of cars buried in white began to take shape. Nora glanced at him again and noticed the way his posture shifted every time he took a breath, a small wince, a subtle correction to keep the pain at bay. The bruises on his face had started to turn that ugly yellow-blue of healing, but his eyes had not softened. He was still on guard. "I have to ask you something," she said finally, setting her cup down. He looked at her, unreadable. She reached into the drawer of her side table and pulled out the watch she'd taken from his coat. She held it up, turning it slightly so the engraved initials caught the light. "W.A.," she said softly. "That's not short for Liam, is it?" For a long moment, he said nothing. The air in the room seemed to tighten. Then he leaned forward and took the watch from her fingers. "I suppose I owe you the truth," he murmured. She didn't speak. She waited. He turned the watch in his hands as if drawing courage from the cold metal, then met her gaze. "My name is William Ashcroft." The name landed with a weight she hadn't anticipated, even if she didn't immediately recognize it. Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. "You've heard of me?" he added after a beat. "I've heard the name," she said carefully. "You're the one who vanished. Disgraced billionaire." He replied with a hollow laugh. "That's the headline. Tech mogul implodes in spectacular fashion. That's the summary. But the truth?" He paused. "The truth is complicated." She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "Try me." And he did. William Ashcroft had been a name that once made people lean in. The boy genius of the Northeast, founder of Ashcroft Technologies at 25, billionaire by 30, a man who turned artificial intelligence into a household tool and revolutionized data protection across federal and private sectors. But behind the scenes, there had been cracks, power plays, corporate espionage, and a betrayal so brutal it had stolen not just his fortune, but his identity. "My CFO, Derek Langston, was like a brother to me," he said. "We built the company together. I trusted him with everything. Finances, strategy, personal decisions. Too much, it turns out. He funneled money through shell companies in my name, altered ledgers, framed me for fraud. When the feds came, I was the only name on the papers." He rubbed a hand across his jaw as if trying to erase the memory. "My fiancée Vivian. She turned on me the moment the first accusation hit the news. Said she didn't want to be involved in a scandal. 2 weeks after I was indicted, she moved in with Derek." Nora exhaled slowly. "And no one believed your side?" He shook his head. "When you have that much money, people assume you're guilty. The press loves a fall from grace. And I didn't fight it at first. I was too ashamed, too angry. I disappeared before they could arrest me. I needed time to think, to survive." She watched him closely. His confession hadn't come with tears or dramatics. It was quiet, steady, and devastating in its simplicity. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come back? Why let someone help you?" He met her eyes. "Because when I woke up in that alley, freezing and broken, you were the first person who didn't ask me for anything. You just helped." Nora swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight. "You could have died. I know. And yet here you are," she whispered. hiding in a nurse's apartment, telling her your life story. He smiled slightly. Maybe I finally found someone worth telling. That afternoon, she offered him a choice. You can stay here until you're strong enough to leave. I won't turn you in. But if you want to do more than survive, I know a place where you can help. He raised an eyebrow. The free clinic I volunteer at. It's understaffed, underfunded, and mostly ignored. But it's full of people who need help. And maybe it's selfish, but I think it might help you too. He looked uncertain. You want me to go be useful? No, she said gently. I want you to see what the world looks like when no one cares who you were. He considered it, then nodded. And for the first time since he'd collapsed into her life, Nora saw the edge of something human return to his expression. Not just pain, not just guilt, hope. That night, as they sat side by side on the couch, the storm outside began to clear. The sky lifted just enough to reveal stars, faint behind the city lights. She leaned her head against the cushion, not quite touching his shoulder, but close enough to feel his presence. He didn't speak. Neither did she. But in the quiet, something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, but the fragile beginnings of trust. And that, she thought, might be the bravest thing either of them had felt in a long time. The air between them had changed since that quiet night. The distance that once measured uncertainty was slowly dissolving into something else, something softer. In the days that followed William's confession, he became a little less guarded, still watchful, still cautious, but less like a man expecting to be betrayed at any moment. Nora didn't push him. She never did. Instead, she offered space and silence. And in return, William filled that silence not with words but with action. The bruises on his face faded. His steps grew firmer. His eyes, once dull with pain, began to take in the world around him with a focus she hadn't seen before. He asked questions about her job, her routine, the clinic she volunteered at on Saturdays in Humboldt Park, the neighborhood, the people. And one morning, after watching her lace up her boots by the door, he simply said, "Take me with you." She blinked, not sure she'd heard correctly. "To the clinic," he clarified. "You said they needed help." Nora studied him. "You know it's not a charity gala or a tech expo. It's real work, long hours, no cameras, no applause." "That's the point," he replied, pulling on the borrowed coat she'd found in the back of her closet. "I've done everything with applause. I want to remember who I was without it." The clinic was a brick building sandwiched between a corner market and a rundown bakery. Inside, it was a patchwork of community effort, worn tiles, hand-painted posters, folding chairs. The heater worked just well enough to keep the cold out, and the waiting room was always full. The staff was skeletal. Nora was greeted with hugs and tired smiles. "This is William," she introduced simply. "He's here to help." No one asked who he really was. In this place, names were not currency. What mattered was showing up, staying kind, and doing the work. William started in the supply room, organizing donations. Then he moved to inventory. By week's end, he was manning the intake desk, listening to stories from patients with aching joints and undocumented fears. He didn't flinch, didn't judge, and something remarkable happened. He began to disappear, not in the way he had when he fled the media, but in the way a man sheds the skin of who he used to be. In place of sharp suits and stock options came rolled-up sleeves and quiet conversations. In place of boardrooms and betrayals came thank you notes drawn in crayon by children who remembered the man with the kind voice. One evening, Nora caught him kneeling beside a young boy with asthma, showing him how to breathe through a paper bag. His voice was calm, steady, reassuring. She stood by the door watching them, something unspoken blooming behind her ribs. Later, that night, back in her apartment, he surprised her. "You should paint again." She looked up from her tea. "What?" "You talk about it like it used to matter, like it still does. It was just a hobby." "Nothing is just a hobby if it heals you." His words disarmed her. She wanted to deflect, joke, change the subject. But instead she found herself pulling the old canvas from her closet. The paints were dry in some places, cracked at the edges, but they still held color. She sat up by the window, letting the last of the golden hour light spill across the table. William didn't hover. He watched from a distance, silent and steady, and she began to paint again. For days, life became strangely whole. They woke early, ate together, traveled to the clinic in silence that no longer felt empty. They spoke of small things, memories, tastes, music, and in those small things something deeper formed. Then came the night of the gala. It had been William's idea. A fundraising event to raise awareness and donations for the clinic. He organized it quietly using a false name, calling in favors from contacts who still owed him debts, trusting only the ones who hadn't flinched when he'd fallen. He rented the back room of an art gallery on the near north side, modest, elegant, with exposed brick walls and local paintings lining the space. Nora wore a black dress he hadn't seen before. Simple, graceful. She stepped into the room like someone born to belong there, and for a moment William forgot how to speak. "You clean up well," she said, adjusting the lapel of his thrifted suit. "You shine," he replied without hesitation. The night passed in a blur of speeches, whispered toasts, and soft jazz from a corner band. William stayed in the background, content to let the spotlight fall on the cause. Then, just past 10, someone called his name. Not Liam, not Mr. Walker, the alias he had used, but William. The room didn't freeze, but he did. He turned slowly. A man in a tailored coat stood near the bar, holding a glass of champagne and a phone in the other hand. His smile was polite, calculated. "William Ashcroft," the man repeated, loud enough now. "Is that really you?" Nora was by his side in an instant. "Do you know him?" "Yes," William said quietly. "He's press." The man stepped closer, too close. "Quite the fall from grace. Volunteering at clinics now? How noble. Is this your comeback tour or just a soft landing before the next scandal?" "Get out," Nora said coldly. The man looked amused. "I'm just asking questions." William stepped forward. "Ask them somewhere else." The reporter left eventually, but the damage had been done. Whispers began. Guests excused themselves early. The warmth of the evening collapsed like a house of cards. Back in the apartment, Nora didn't speak. She closed the door, took off her shoes, and walked to the kitchen. William stood in the hallway waiting. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For being who I am." She turned, leaning against the counter. "You're not that man anymore." "But he still follows me," he said. "Everywhere." She stepped closer. "So let him follow, just don't let him lead." He looked at her then, really looked. She was tired, frustrated, but she wasn't afraid. "I didn't expect you to defend me," he admitted. "I didn't do it for you," she said, softly. "I did it because that man thought he could reduce you to a headline. And you're not a headline. You're a human being." He exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders slowly. For a while they said nothing. Then quietly he asked, "Why are you still helping me?" "Because someone has to," she replied. "Because you were broken when I found you, but you let me see something real underneath it. And because I think maybe I'm a little broken too, and maybe we can help fix each other." He didn't answer with words. He stepped forward and touched her hand. It wasn't a kiss, it wasn't a promise, but it was something that reached across the wounds they both carried and said, "I'm still here." And for now, that was enough. Spring crept back into the city with hesitant grace. The ice that had once frozen every corner of Chicago was now melting into glistening puddles along sidewalks, and patches of green began to emerge beneath the gray. The transformation was subtle, but Nora felt it everywhere. In the longer daylight, in the smell of thawed earth, and most of all, in William. He had begun to heal. Not just physically, though the bruises had faded and his limp had all but disappeared. His wounds ran deeper than skin, and in the stillness of her apartment, those scars had started to close. They had created a routine, quiet, consistent, and strangely intimate. It wasn't a romance, not in the traditional sense. There were no declarations, no grand gestures. Instead, there was presence, shared meals, walks to the clinic, laughter that didn't need to be explained. And in those small details, something beautiful was quietly taking root. William had become essential to the rhythm of Nora's life in a way she hadn't anticipated. He didn't occupy space like an outsider anymore. He helped cook breakfast, folded laundry while she was at work, even fixed the broken door handle to her bathroom that had annoyed her for months. It was domestic, but not in the way her past relationships had been. This wasn't about performance or roles. It was about finding peace together. The clinic was flourishing in ways it hadn't before. William had helped modernize their appointment system with a program he designed in a single weekend. Donations had increased, though he was careful to remained behind the scenes, never allowing his name to appear on any public acknowledgement. He stayed invisible, but his impact was unmistakable. It was during a quiet Sunday afternoon, while sorting through donation bins, that Nora saw him speaking with a patient, a woman in her 40s with 4 children and a chronic heart condition. Her English was broken, her eyes cautious, but William spoke to her like she was the most important person in the world. He knelt to eye level with her daughter, offered her a sticker from a roll he kept in his pocket, and made her laugh. Not a polite giggle, a full, loud, unfiltered laugh. Nora stood at the doorway, heart heavy in the best possible way. She realized then that she wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was afraid of losing him. That night, while they sat on the fire, escape watching the sunset burn gold across the skyline, she asked him, "Do you miss it?" He turned to her a little confused. "Miss what?" "All of it. The world you left behind. The wealth, the power, being someone the world bowed to." He thought for a long time. "I used to think I would die without it," he admitted. "I tied my entire worth to that empire. I didn't just build a company, I built my identity around it. When it crumbled, I thought I crumbled with it." "But you didn't," she said. "No," he agreed softly. "Because I found something more honest, something harder, more real." She glanced over at him, the light catching the edge of his profile. "You," he said. She looked away, blinking fast. "You don't have to say that," she whispered. "I'm not saying it to impress you," he replied. "I'm saying it because it's the only thing I've said in months that feels like it might actually save me." She didn't respond with words. She leaned her head against his shoulder and let silence hold the rest. But silence didn't last. 2 days later, as they walked back from the clinic, hand in hand for the first time, they noticed a car parked across the street from Nora's building. It wasn't one they recognized. Black, tinted windows, idling. William froze. Nora felt the shift in him immediately. "Don't look," he said quietly. "Just keep walking." They made it inside without incident. But that night, William barely slept. He stood by the window for hours, watching, listening, waiting. "I think someone found me," he said at dawn. Nora sat up in bed, heart pounding. "Who?" "I don't know, but I need to leave." The words hit her like cold water. "Leave?" she echoed. "You said it was safe. You said we were okay." "I thought we were," he said. "But I can't risk them finding you. If they trace me here, they'll drag you into everything." She stood, pulling on a sweatshirt. "So that's it? You vanish again? After everything?" "I don't want to," he said. "But I can't bring this storm down on you." She crossed the room, grabbing his arm. "You think I care about headlines? You think I haven't been through worse? I chose this, I chose you." His eyes were desperate now. "And I love you for it. That's why I have to go." She stepped back like she'd been slapped. "You love me?" she whispered. He didn't answer, because the words were too dangerous now. They were an anchor in a storm, and he couldn't let them hold him down. Not when she was the only part of his life still untouched by the destruction he'd left behind. When she woke the next morning, he was gone. No note, no goodbye. Just the faint smell of his soap on her towel and the folded blanket on the couch. For days she didn't cry. She went to work. She painted. She stood in front of the mirror and told herself that good things don't last, and that maybe some people are meant to arrive only long enough to teach us what love can feel like before they leave us stronger. Then they found us. But one night, while organizing patient files, she turned on the old radio at the clinic and caught the end of a national news broadcast. In a stunning turn of events, former tech mogul William Ashcroft has resurfaced in New York City. After a months-long disappearance, Ashcroft has turned over extensive evidence to federal prosecutors implicating his former CFO Derek Langston in a sweeping embezzlement scheme. Sources say Ashcroft's cooperation could not only exonerate him, but bring justice to dozens of displaced employees and investors. More after the break. The file slipped from her hands. Her fingers shook as she reached for the desk to steady herself. He hadn't run. He had gone back to finish what he started. He had gone back for the truth. And somewhere deep in her chest, something old and frozen cracked open, just enough to let a breath of spring through. New York City moved with its usual brand of arrogance, lights flickering on at dusk like they belonged to the stars, traffic snarling through the avenues as if the chaos itself was proud. But inside the walls of the old stone federal building on Center Street, time had stilled. William Ashcroft sat across from a conference table, his fingers loosely interlocked, his knuckles pale from pressure he wasn't conscious of. The room was windowless, cold, too brightly lit. The lawyers across from him wore identical grey suits and identical looks of skepticism. "This is everything," William said quietly, sliding a slim flash drive across the table. The younger of the two attorneys picked it up like it might burn him. "Bank records?" "And internal emails," William confirmed. "Signed authorizations, asset transfers, private correspondence between Derek Langston and 3 offshore entities based in Liechtenstein and Cyprus. All traced, all time-stamped." But the older attorney leaned back in his chair. "Why now?" William hesitated. He could have said 1,000 things. That it was time, that his conscience had caught up, that he wanted to rebuild his life, but the only image in his mind was Nora, standing in her kitchen with paint on her fingers, listening to jazz on the radio, smiling at him like he might finally be safe. "Because someone believed I was worth saving," he said. "And I can't live with myself if I don't prove she was right." They didn't need more. The FBI agents took him into protective custody, not to detain him, but to keep him safe. The trial was imminent, and Derek Langston had powerful allies who wouldn't take kindly to William's resurrection. But William wasn't afraid anymore. He had already faced the worst version of himself in the mirror, and lived. Back in Chicago, Nora had memorized the sound of silence. It filled her apartment like fog, wrapping around her in familiar ways. She returned to the clinic every day. Patients came and went. Children still drew stick figures on the chalkboard wall. But something vital was missing. Some nights she stood at the fire escape with a mug of tea and watched the sky like she expected him to return on a gust of wind. She had tried to find him, tried to call numbers that no longer worked. She had even reached out to the only person she hadn't spoken to in 5 years. Her father, Daniel Whitmore, retired federal judge and at one time the sharpest mind in the Chicago District Court. He met her at a cafe near Grant Park. His face had grown more severe with age, his voice even more formal than she remembered. But when she told him William's real name and that he was risking everything to right the wrongs done to him, Daniel had listened. When she finished, he said, "You still believe people can be redeemed?" She replied, "You taught me to fight. For justice. This is justice." Daniel promised to make a few calls. It wasn't much, but it was something. Days later, Nora was walking out of the clinic when she saw a small group of reporters huddled around a newsstand. She didn't usually stop for gossip rags, but one headline made her freeze. "Ashcroft returns. Evidence destroys fraud allegations." Her throat tightened. A television mounted above the newsstand played a press conference. There he was, William, standing behind a podium in a navy suit, clean-shaven, steady, not hiding. "I was betrayed by someone I trusted," he said, "but I am not here to talk about revenge. I'm here to clear my name and to say thank you to the people who helped me remember who I am." The crowd buzzed. A reporter shouted, "Will you rebuild Ashcroft Technologies?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My priorities have changed." When asked if there was someone special who helped him through the ordeal, he answered simply, "Yes." He didn't name her, but Nora knew. She turned from the screen, heart racing. The pride swelled before the ache did. He had done it. He had stood up for himself, for the truth. He had reclaimed his name without compromising his soul, but he hadn't. Come back. That night, she sat alone in her apartment, fingers curled around a sketchbook she hadn't touched in weeks. The page was blank. So was the space beside her. She didn't cry. She painted, because it was the only thing that could carry her grief without demanding an explanation. 3 days passed. Then one morning, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a neighbor. No packages, no scheduled visits. She opened the door and nearly dropped the cup in her hand. William stood there. No suit, no guards, no bravado. Just him. He looked exhausted and real. "I didn't know if I should come," he said quietly, "but I couldn't stay away." She didn't speak. Her throat was too tight. "I turned over everything," he continued. "Langston's going to prison. Vivian's already fled to Paris. The company will go to a new board. I walked away from all of it." "Why?" she finally asked. "Because none of it matters without you." She stepped aside. He walked in. The apartment hadn't changed, but it felt warmer now. They sat on the couch, the same couch where he had once bled and slept and woken up to kindness. "I thought I lost you," she said. "You did," he replied. "But you found me again." She studied him. This man who had been both broken and brilliant in her living room. He had been her patient, her mystery, her heartache. Now he was her beginning. And when he took her hand in his, she didn't resist. He leaned in, not to possess, not to plead, but to be present. The kiss was quiet, earnest, a thread pulled, tight between two people who had once been lost and found themselves in the most unexpected place, each other. Outside, the wind blew gently through the city, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like, welcome. The days following William's return passed with a gentler kind of urgency. His presence no longer felt temporary. It filled the apartment like a long-awaited breath, steady, solid. Nora had watched him sleep again for the first time since he vanished, and this time he slept without flinching, without waking in the dark, gasping from some dream that refused to loosen its grip. There was a peace in the way he moved through the rooms now. He brewed her coffee before she was out of bed, ran his fingers across the spines of her books like they held a secret he hadn't learned yet. He asked her about her patients, listened as if their stories mattered more than his own redemption ever had. But beneath that peace, something coiled. She sensed it in the pauses, those brief, sharp silences when he read the news too carefully, or when the phone buzzed with no caller ID. William never said anything, but Nora could see him preparing for something. It wasn't over. Not truly. One night, he sat on the edge of their bed, hands clasped, eyes dark with thought. "You know it's not just Langston," he said quietly. "There are others, people who profited from my downfall. People who don't want the truth reaching court." Nora sat beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Then tell the truth louder." "I intend to," he replied. "But I need your help." He told her about the final hearing, an appearance that would allow him to submit the last of his testimony under oath, implicating 2 board members and a tech firm that had quietly taken over Ashcroft's most valuable patent. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about dismantling a system that had protected fraud and punished honesty, and it was dangerous. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you know who I am. Not just the headline, the man. You know where I came from, what I became, and what I'm trying to do now. I need someone by my side who won't flinch." Nora had never flinched. She flew with him to New York that weekend, the city skyline piercing the clouds like a challenge. They stayed in a small hotel in Soho, far from the towering boardrooms and penthouses that once knew William's name. He kept his presence quiet but not hidden. That life was behind him now. He wasn't running anymore. The night before the hearing, they walked through Central Park in silence. It was late. Few people were out. The trees were still bare, but the air smelled of possibility. Nora stopped near the Bethesda terrace and turned to him. "Are you afraid?" He looked at her honestly. "Yes. But not for me." "For what then?" "For what they'll do to you, if they know you stood beside me." She stepped closer, took his hand. "Let them. I'd rather stand beside you in danger than live safe without you." His grip tightened, and just like that, the past loosened its hold. The next morning, they entered the courthouse together. Nora wore a navy blue dress, simple and elegant, her hair pinned back with quiet confidence. William wore no tie. Just a crisp white shirt and a suit that no longer looked like armor but choice. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. The gallery was packed. Reporters, executives, federal agents, people who had once worshipped his name and others who had done everything they could to bury it. William sat at the witness stand and raised his right hand. The oath felt heavier this time. As he spoke, the room fell silent. He outlined the patents, the forged authorizations, the siphoned accounts. He named names. Derek Langston, of course, but also Clayton Yarrow and Felicia Reed, 2 silent board members who had turned a blind eye for profit. He backed every claim with documented proof, timestamps, internal communications, and statements from 3 other former employees who had finally come forward. Every word was measured. Calm. Devastating. And then he paused. "I disappeared," he said slowly, "because I didn't believe I was worth saving. Because I thought the world I built had swallowed me whole. But someone found me. She didn't care who I had been, only who I was. And for the first time in my life, I stopped needing the world to validate my name. Because she did." In the gallery, Nora didn't move, but her throat burned. The court adjourned just after noon. Outside, a crush of reporters swarmed the steps. William gave no comment. Nora walked at his side, shielding his body more than her own. Later, in the quiet of the hotel room, he said, "It's done." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on his face. "You said you didn't believe you were worth saving," she murmured. "But you were wrong. You saved yourself. I just reminded you it was possible." He stepped toward her and kissed her. Not gently, but like the storm had finally passed and he was ready to stand in the sunlight. They didn't leave New York immediately. For the first time, they allowed themselves to slow down. They explored, ate dinner on a rooftop terrace in Brooklyn, watched a foreign film in a theater where no one recognized them. William took her to the library where he'd spent nights as a teenager dreaming of empires. Nora took him to a small art studio near the village where she picked up fresh brushes and canvases with his hand in hers. One night, she found him standing by the window, staring at the lights of the city. "I always thought power would make me feel safe," he said. "But I never felt safe until I had nothing." She wrapped her arms around him from behind. "You're not nothing. I know that now." He turned in her arms, kissed her forehead. "I want to go back," he said. "To Chicago. To the clinic. To the life we started." "Then let's go," she whispered. They returned not as fugitives, not as ghosts, but as survivors. And for the first time in either of their lives, home wasn't a place. It was each other. They returned to Chicago in late April, just as the city shook off the final chill of winter. The trees along Humboldt Park stretched toward the sun, budding in slow, defiant bloom. For William, the return wasn't a retreat. It was a declaration. No longer a man in hiding, he walked with purpose now, no shadows trailing behind him. He had reclaimed his name, not to wear it like a crown, but to lay it down in the life he was choosing, one where truth mattered more than power and love more than legacy. Nora watched him settle in with quiet amazement. He wasn't just recovering anymore. He was transforming. The clinic welcomed him back without fanfare but with knowing smiles. The staff had heard the headlines. They had watched the footage, but no one asked questions. Here William wasn't the phoenix rising from the wreckage of his empire. He was the man who reset the router, who refilled the water coolers, who made kids laugh when they were too scared to speak. One morning, as Nora stocked the supply cabinet, she found a folded flyer on her desk. It was for a fundraising gala, the first official one under William's name. Not for tech, not for corporate redemption, but for the clinic. "I want them to have a future," he said when she asked about it. "And I want it to be built with integrity, with community." She smiled, touched the edge of the flyer. "So you're staying?" "I never left," he answered. Planning the gala became their shared mission. It was the first time since their paths crossed that they were building something visible together. They hosted meetings in the apartment, laughed over wine and scribbled ideas on napkins and pulled favors from people Nora didn't even realize William still had connections to. Not because he wanted to return to that world, but because he believed in leveraging his privilege for something that mattered now. During one of their late-night sessions, as Nora reviewed catering options and William combed through potential sponsors, she looked up and said, "I think I'm scared." He glanced up. "Of what?" "Of being happy." William set the paper. "Down," she continued, voice softer now. "For so long I've been surviving. Even before you, it felt like life was about enduring. Nights on shift, patients who never made it, people I couldn't save. I didn't make space for things like this. For you." He stood, crossed the room, and crouched beside her chair. "Then let's make the space," he said. "Let's start living." Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't realized how deeply she needed to hear those words. The night of the gala arrived with quiet anticipation. Held in the Chicago Cultural Center, the venue shimmered with intention. Nothing extravagant, but tasteful, radiant. Local artists donated pieces for auction. Musicians from the neighborhood offered to play without pay. Volunteers from the clinic helped with everything from lighting to invitations. Nora wore a floor-length gown in forest green. Her hair was pinned loosely, a few strands escaping to soften her face. When William saw her step through the doors, he forgot the speech he'd prepared. "You're luminous," he whispered. She took his hand, her touch grounding him. "You're ready?" she asked. He nodded. "I've never been more." The evening unfolded like a slow dance. Guests mingled, stories were shared, and laughter bubbled like champagne. At one point, William took the stage. He didn't speak of the past. He didn't mention scandals or betrayals or corporations. He spoke of healing, of hope, of second chances not as miracles, but as decisions, ones we give to each other and sometimes to ourselves. Nora watched him from the edge of the room, surrounded by the people whose lives had been quietly changed by his return. He stood not as a man seeking forgiveness, but as someone who had found peace in giving. After his speech, he found her again. "I want to show you something," he said. They slipped away from the crowd, past the marble columns, up a narrow staircase, to a balcony that overlooked the lake in the distance. The city sparkled beneath them. "I never imagined this," she said. "Not any of it." "I did," he murmured. "Not the details, but the feeling. I imagined that if I ever got back to myself, to who I could have been, it would feel like this." She turned to him, her eyes glistening. "You are who you're meant to be. You were always him." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. Her breath caught again, not from surprise but from clarity. A ring, simple, silver, engraved with a line only she would understand. "I don't need grand gestures," he said. "I don't need the world's approval, but I do need you." Tears welled in her eyes. "You came into my life when I had nothing left," he continued. "You saw through every mask, every bruise, every failure, and instead of turning away, you stayed. Nora Whitmore, will you build this life with me? Not as a fairy tale, but as a promise." She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered, voice breaking. He slipped the ring on her finger, and for a moment, the chaos of their histories fell silent. It wasn't the beginning. It was the continuation of a choice they'd both made long ago, in a snowstorm, in a quiet apartment, between bruises and trust. Now, they stood as equals, not saving one another, but choosing every day to walk forward together. Below them, the city kept moving. Lights flickered, cars honked, life continued. But up there in the quiet, something profound had settled. Not just love, belonging. Summer arrived in Chicago with unapologetic warmth. The city pulsed with color. Blooms exploded along sidewalks. Fountains danced in public parks. And laughter echoed from open windows. Life moved faster, louder, more alive. Yet inside the small brick building that housed the Humboldt Park Clinic, time still moved with reverence. The Nora Whitmore Community Health Center, newly renamed, had become more than a clinic. It was a symbol, a story, proof that second chances weren't just for people, but for places, for neighborhoods often overlooked. And on its foundation stood the very people who had once lived quietly in the margins. Nora stepped out of her office, clipboard in hand, her scrubs wrinkled from hours, on her feet. Her hair was pulled back, her smile quick and warm. She moved with certainty now, not out of routine, but purpose. William stood near the front desk, reviewing intake forms on a tablet he'd designed himself. Secure, paperless, and accessible in 3 languages. He wore jeans and a button-down shirt, sleeves rolled, and his wedding ring caught the sunlight from the open door. He looked up when she approached, eyes softening. "You forgot your lunch," he said, holding up a small paper bag. She grinned. "You really are the husband of the year." He leaned in, kissed her cheek. "Just returning the favor. You're the one keeping half this block breathing." She laughed, then paused, her gaze drifting to a photo newly hung on the clinic's entryway wall. It showed the two of them standing beside a ribbon-cutting ceremony, flanked by neighborhood kids holding up hand-drawn signs. "Thank you, William," and "Nora saved us." Neither of them had asked for recognition, but the community had insisted. That evening, they walked home slowly, hand in hand, letting the golden dusk stretch between them. They'd moved into a small townhouse a few blocks from the clinic, nothing extravagant, but filled with windows and soft light and bookshelves that seemed to multiply on their own. It was home, not a fortress, not a hiding place, just a space that held them honestly. As they passed the mural near the old bakery, now restored with community funding, William stopped and pulled her gently toward a nearby bench. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice more serious than usual. She turned to him. "About what?" "Legacy." She tilted her head. "Yours?" "Ours," he corrected. "Not in the empire building sense, not Ashcroft Technologies or anything with my name in lights, but in the everyday, the real, what we leave behind when the noise quiets." Nora smiled. "You've already done more than most ever dream of." "But I want more," he admitted. "I want to invest, not just money, but time, energy. I want to build a scholarship fund, for underrepresented students in medicine. I want to help expand the clinic into a mobile unit, bring care to those who can't come to us. Her eyes lit up. That's incredible, and I want you to co-lead it with me, he said. Not just as a partner, but as the heart of it. She took his hand. You know I'm in. They sat in silence, the kind born of mutual vision, the kind that stretched comfortably between two people who had already fought every storm together. Later that week, they launched the initiative. It was quiet, just as they preferred. No red carpet, no speeches, just results. Within a month, 2 mobile units were in production. Within 3, the first scholarship had been awarded to a young woman named Marisol, whose family had immigrated from Honduras and who had shadowed Nora at the clinic for nearly a year. William watched from the back of the room as Nora handed Marisol her certificate. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His pride was evident in the way his hand pressed briefly over his heart. That night back at home, Nora curled beside him on the couch. You ever think about how strange this is? She asked. How so? That you ended up here. That I found you in the snow. That we're married. That you're running a clinic. He chuckled. Every day, and I wouldn't change a second of it. She looked at him, her expression shifting. Not even the hard parts? Especially the hard parts, he said, because they brought me here. To you. They didn't speak again for a long time. Instead, they just listened. To the sound of the wind moving through the alley, to the occasional bark of a dog, to the rhythm of a city that had grown to love them back. Eventually, Nora stood, disappeared into the spare room. When she returned, she held a small wrapped box. I was saving this, she said, handing it to him. He opened it slowly. Inside was a simple hardcover notebook bound in navy blue leather. The first page had only one line, written in her neat script. Write the life you want. I'll help you build it. His breath caught. I love you, he said, not just out of habit, but from the depths of everything he'd become. I know, she whispered. Me too. Years from now, no one would remember the exact date William Ashcroft cleared his name. No headlines would mark the moment he stepped away from power, but the kids at the clinic would remember the man who showed them how to breathe through asthma attacks. The single mothers would remember the warm hand that held theirs during the hardest diagnoses. And Nora would remember the man who knocked on her door in a snowstorm, broken and brave, and chose to live a life of quiet purpose beside her. Not because he had to, but because love gave him the chance to begin again. And this time he didn't run, he stayed.